The luxurious glow of crystal chandeliers bathed the upscale restaurant in an air of exclusivity, but the atmosphere was anything but calm. Linda Matthews, a poised and confident FBI agent, sat at her table, her sharp eyes fixed on her target, Ethan Grant, whose polished image masked a web of criminal deceit. Across the room, a storm was brewing. The quiet tension shattered as Officer Paul Richards stormed in, his eyes narrowing immediately on Linda. He strode toward her table without hesitation, radiating authority laced with disdain. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice slicing through the murmurs of the other diners. "I need to see your ID now." Linda held his gaze, her expression calm but her heart racing. This wasn't part of the plan. Every second of this confrontation placed her covert mission at risk, and Ethan's eyes were already on her, his curiosity piqued by the sudden commotion. "Bookmark?" Richard smirked as he examined her ID, his tone dripping with mockery. "Linda Matthews. Interesting. What brings someone like you to a place like this?" The room's attention zeroed in on her, and Linda knew she was standing on a razor's edge. The mission she had spent months planning was unraveling, and the stakes had never been higher. Before we dive into this thrilling story of betrayal, danger, and justice, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you're excited about this gripping tale of Linda Matthews' incredible mission, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more stories like this one. Under the opulent glow of crystal chandeliers, Linda Matthews, an accomplished FBI agent, sat upright at her table in a prestigious restaurant. The lavish atmosphere, with its polished cutlery and sparkling glasses, could not disguise the silent question lingering in the eyes of other patrons. What is she doing here? Linda, the only black woman in the room, was all too familiar with such looks. Her tailored attire and calm demeanor exuded professionalism, yet the room's hushed whispers and lingering stares reminded her of the barriers she faced daily. Linda wasn't there to enjoy fine dining. She was on a covert mission, her sharp eyes fixed on a tall, charismatic figure who had just entered the restaurant. The man was Ethan Grant, a well-known business magnate whose charm and philanthropy masked his deep involvement in an extensive criminal network. For months, Linda had been investigating Ethan, piecing together the trail of corruption that linked him to illegal arms trading, human trafficking, and high-stakes money laundering. Tonight, she hoped to gather crucial evidence to bring him to justice. Ethan entered the room with an aura of confidence, his presence commanding attention. Conversations halted as guests turned their heads, captivated by his charisma. Ethan was more than just a wealthy businessperson. He was a master manipulator, always alert and suspicious. His eyes scanned the room precisely, briefly locking onto Linda before continuing his survey. Linda's instincts sharpened. She adjusted the delicate bracelet on her wrist, which concealed a state-of-the-art recording device, ready to capture every incriminating word. Though Linda appeared poised, a growing unease gnawed at her. The restaurant's polished elegance shrouded a tension she couldn't quite place. Ethan's movements were deliberate, and his interactions with others felt calculated, as though he was searching for something, or someone. Linda's gut told her tonight wouldn't unfold as planned. The restaurant's heavy oak doors suddenly swung open, shattering the composed ambiance. In strode Paul Richards, a police officer infamous for his brazen misuse of authority. His tall frame and arrogant stride exuded a smug sense of control, and his sharp eyes seemed to assess everyone in the room as if they were beneath him. When Richard's gaze landed on Linda, she immediately felt the shift. His expression hardened, and a faint smirk tugged at his lips. He approached her table, his heavy boots resonating against the marble floor. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice firm and authoritative. "May I see some identification?" Linda kept her composure, meeting his eyes calmly. "Of course, officer," she replied, her tone polite but firm. "May I ask why you need to see it?" Richard's smirk widened, devoid of any warmth. "We've received a complaint," he said, his words laced with thinly veiled prejudice. "Someone finds your presence here unusual." The meaning behind his words was clear. To Richards, Linda's race and solitary presence in such a luxurious setting were reason enough for suspicion. His tone, paired with the curious glances from nearby diners, only heightened the tension. Linda reached into her bag and handed over her ID. "Here's my identification," she said, her voice unwavering. "I trust this will clear up any misunderstanding." Richards examined her ID, his brow furrowing slightly as he read her name aloud. Linda Matthews, he said mockingly, flipping the card over as though searching for a flaw. You're here alone, no food on the table, he remarked. So, what exactly brings you to a place like this? Ethan, seated near the bar, turned his head at the commotion. His sharp eyes narrowed slightly, observing the unfolding interaction with interest. The sudden attention on Linda wasn't part of her plan. I'm here for dinner, Linda replied, her voice steady. Is there a problem with that? Richards leaned closer, his smile fading into a cold glare. This place isn't for people like you, he said bluntly. Stand up and come with me. Let's clear this up outside. Linda's heart raced, but she maintained her calm exterior. Every moment of this confrontation put her mission at greater risk, yet she couldn't afford to escalate the situation. Officer, she said firmly, I've done nothing wrong. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them here. Richards ignored her words, signaling to another officer who had just entered. Cuff her, he ordered. The metallic click of handcuffs snapped around Linda's wrists, the cold steel biting into her skin. The restaurant fell silent as patrons watched, some with judgment, others with quiet sympathy. Ethan's eyes remained fixed on Linda, his expression unreadable but intense. As Linda was escorted out, she felt Ethan's gaze follow her every step. His attention wasn't one of mere curiosity. It was calculating, as though he was piecing together a puzzle. Linda's mission, months in the making, was suddenly teetering on the edge of failure. In the back seat of the police car, Linda clenched her fists, her mind racing. Though her hands were bound, her determination remained unbroken. She would turn this setback into an opportunity, somehow. The police car rolled through the dimly lit streets, its sirens piercing the stillness of the night. Linda Matthews sat in the back seat, her hands cuffed behind her, the cold metal pressing into her skin. The city lights flickered through the tinted windows, shifting shadows across her composed face. Standing in the driver's seat, Officer Paul Richards occasionally glanced at her through the rearview mirror. A smug grin stretched across his lips, his satisfaction apparent. To him, this was a small victory, a way to assert his authority over someone he deemed undeserving of the space she had occupied. Thought you could waltz into that restaurant like you belonged, huh? Richard said, breaking the tense silence. His voice dripped with condescension. Linda didn't respond. She kept her gaze steady, focusing on the cityscape flashing by outside. Every word Richards uttered only fueled her determination to remain calm. Engaging with him would achieve nothing, and she would have more significant problems to address. In the passenger seat, another officer, a younger man with an uneasy demeanor, shifted uncomfortably. He cast a furtive glance at Richards, but said nothing. His silence spoke volumes. He wasn't comfortable with what was happening, but he lacked the courage to challenge his superior. She's too quiet, Richards muttered, his grin faltering. People like her always have something to hide. Linda's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. She knew Richards wasn't looking for answers. He was looking for submission. When the car pulled to a small police station, its flickering fluorescent lights casting an eerie glow, Richards stepped out with exaggerated authority. He opened the back door and roughly pulled Linda to her feet. She didn't resist, her steps steady as he led her through the entrance. Inside, the station buzzed with activity. Phones rang incessantly, and officers hurried through the cramped hallways, their voices a blend of urgency and routine. Linda was taken to a stark interrogation room, its harsh white lights amplifying the tension in the air. Richard shoved her into a metal chair, the force unnecessary but deliberate. Linda's expression didn't waver as she met his gaze, her calm demeanor and unspoken defiance. "All right," Richard said, pacing the small room like a predator circling its prey. "Let's hear it. What were you doing at that restaurant?" Linda leaned back slightly, her voice measured. "I was having dinner. That's not a crime, is it?" Richard slammed his hands onto the metal table, reverberating through the room. "Don't play games with me. You're not fooling anyone." Linda held his gaze, unflinching. "Officer Richards, I've done nothing wrong. Your actions tonight are based on assumptions, not facts." Richard's eyes narrowed, a flicker of frustration breaking through his facade of control. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially by someone he perceived as powerless. The door to the interrogation room suddenly swung open, and a tall man in a sharp suit stepped inside. His commanding presence filled the space, and Richards stiffened immediately. "I'm Michael Hunter, FBI," the man announced, his tone cold and authoritative. He placed a folder on the table, his piercing gaze locking onto Richards. "And the woman you've unlawfully detained is one of our top agents." Richards blinked, his smug confidence crumbling in an instant. This is a misunderstanding," he stammered. Michael's expression hardened. "It's not a misunderstanding," he said sharply. "Every action you've taken has been recorded. You've overstepped your authority, and there will be consequences." Reluctantly, Richards reached into his pocket for the handcuff keys. His hands trembled slightly as he unlocked Linda's restraints. She rubbed her wrists briefly, her calm exterior unshaken despite the humiliation she had endured. Linda turned her gaze to Richards as she stood, her silence more potent than any words. Richards avoided her eyes, the weight of his actions sinking in as the room grew quieter. Michael led Linda to a sleek black SUV outside the station, waiting by the curb. Once inside, the tension in his expression softened slightly as he turned to face her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentler now. Linda nodded. "I'm fine," she said, though her tone carried an undercurrent of frustration. "But this changes everything. Ethan Grant saw the whole thing. He knows I'm not just another diner." Michael tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, his brow furrowing in thought. "That could work to our advantage," he said after a moment. Linda raised an eyebrow. "How?" Michael's lips curved into a calculated smile. "We make this public. Let the story spread. Black woman wrongfully arrested at an upscale restaurant. It'll shield your true identity and divert Ethan's suspicion. He'll think you're just a victim of systemic injustice." Linda considered the plan, and her skepticism was evident. "You think he'll buy it?" Michael nodded. "Ethan preys on vulnerability. If he sees you as someone disillusioned with the system, someone hurt by its biases, he'll see an opportunity to manipulate you." The risk was undeniable, but Linda knew it was the only way to salvage her mission. "All right," she said, her resolve firm. "But we need to control the narrative." Michael offered a rare, encouraging smile. "You're the one steering this now, Linda. I trust you." As the SUV pulled away, Linda gazed out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of color. Her arrest had changed the game entirely. But she was determined to turn the setback into an advantage. This wasn't just about infiltrating Ethan's world anymore. It was about using every twist and turn to bring him down. The next evening, Linda Matthews walked into the same upscale restaurant she had been escorted out of just a night before. This time, her entrance was deliberate, every step calculated. The crystal chandeliers cast their shimmering glow again, but Linda was the center of attention tonight. The headlines had spread like wildfire. "Black woman wrongfully arrested at luxury restaurant." News outlets amplified the injustice, painting Linda as a victim of systemic bias. Her composed and resilient demeanor in the face of humiliation had captured the public's admiration. The attention was overwhelming, but it played perfectly into her cover. The whispers started almost immediately as Linda moved through the dining room. Some patrons tried to avoid looking at her directly, while others exchanged curious glances and murmurs. The weight of their stares didn't faze her. It was part of the plan. At a secluded corner table, Ethan Grant sat observing the scene. His cold, calculating gaze tracked Linda as she approached, his mind clearly at work. For someone like Ethan, every person was a puzzle, and Linda's sudden rise to public attention had intrigued him. "Ms. Matthews," Ethan said smoothly, standing to greet her. His tone was polite, but there was a razor-sharp edge to it. "Quite the headline maker, aren't you?" "So it seems," Linda replied, her voice steady as she sat across from him. She met his gaze without flinching, her eyes reflecting a mixture of calm and resolve. "Not exactly the kind of attention I was looking for." Ethan's lips curled into a thin smile. "No one asked for that kind of attention," he said, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "But you handled yourself well. The system has a way of reminding us of our place, doesn't it?" Linda nodded, leaning slightly forward to emphasize sincerity. "Exactly. You try to do everything right, play by the rules, and still, they find a way to push you out." Ethan's smile deepened, though his eyes remained cold and calculating. "It's a compelling narrative," he said, his tone light but probing. but narratives are only as good as the person who lives them. Tell me, Linda, what do you plan to do now? Linda allowed a faint smile, careful not to overplay her hand. I've spent years waiting for justice, thinking the system would eventually work. But maybe it's time to stop waiting and start standing up for myself. For a moment, Ethan was silent, studying her intently. He had an uncanny ability to read people, to detect the slightest hint of insincerity. But Linda had spent months preparing for this moment. Every word, every expression was meticulously crafted to draw him in. I respect that, Ethan said, leaning back in his chair. It takes courage to admit when the rules don't work in your favor. But courage alone isn't enough. If you want to make a difference, you need allies. Linda tilted her head slightly, feigning curiosity. And what do you suggest I do? Ethan's smile returned, but it was sharper now, more predatory. I could help you, he said. But it's a two-way street. I need to know you're willing to step outside the lines. The tension in the air thickened as Ethan's words hung between them. This was the moment Linda had been waiting for. A glimpse into the network she'd been trying to infiltrate. But she knew better than to show too much eagerness. I'm listening, she said, her tone measured. Ethan leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Someone who's been interfering with my operations. A government official who's made it his mission to disrupt my work. I need someone to deal with him, quietly. Linda's pulse quickened, but her expression remained neutral. This wasn't just a test of loyalty, but a direct invitation into Ethan's inner circle. The stakes had just been raised, and any hesitation could shatter the fragile trust she had worked so hard to build. What exactly are you asking me to do? Linda asked, her voice calm but firm. Ethan's smile faded, replaced by a serious expression. I need access to his personal computer. He has files that could jeopardize everything I've built. If you can retrieve them, it'll prove I can trust you. Linda nodded slowly as if considering his request. I'll need details, she said. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. Everything you need is in here, he said. But let me be clear. Failure isn't an option. If you can't handle this, we have no reason to continue our partnership. Linda picked up the folder and glanced at its contents, carefully maintaining her composure. The target was Thomas Reed, a high-ranking official in the Department of Finance. The assignment was as dangerous as it was intricate. I'll take care of it, Linda said, meeting Ethan's gaze. Ethan smiled faintly, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. I knew I could count on you, he said, lifting his glass in a silent toast. As Linda left the restaurant, the folder clutched tightly in her hand. Her mind raced with calculations. This mission wasn't just about proving herself to Ethan. It was about protecting Reed and ensuring no harm came to him. She needed a plan to satisfy Ethan's demands while keeping her cover intact. Back at her apartment, Linda contacted Michael Hunter, her FBI handler. Ethan's given me a job, she said curtly, explaining the details. Michael listened silently before responding. You have to do it, he said, but do it your way. Protect Reed and make sure Ethan gets what he wants without compromising the mission. Linda spent the night devising a meticulous plan, every detail carefully thought out. By morning, she was ready to act. Linda Matthews entered the towering government building early in the morning, dressed in a crisp uniform that mimicked the IT personnel assigned to the Department of Finance. With a confident stride and a clipboard in hand, she easily navigated the labyrinthine hallways. Every movement, every expression was rehearsed to perfection. She couldn't afford even the slightest mistake. The target of her mission, Thomas Reed, was a seasoned government official and a key figure in several investigations into high-profile criminal activities, including Ethan Grant's operations. The stakes of the mission were twofold: gain Ethan's trust while protecting Reed and ensuring no harm came his way. Linda had spent the previous night studying every detail of Reed's office layout, routines, and security protocols. She knew she had only a narrow window to access his computer and copy the files Ethan wanted, without raising suspicion. As she approached the security desk, Linda's heart remained steady, her focus unshaken. The guard glanced at her ID badge, an expertly forged replica, and waved her through without a second glance. Inside Reed's office, Linda found the official seated behind his desk, engrossed in his work. His graying hair and weathered face spoke of years of experience, and his sharp eyes briefly flicked up to assess her as she entered. "System maintenance," Linda said with a professional smile, holding up the clipboard. "There's been a reported issue with network connectivity on this floor. I'll only need a few minutes." Reed frowned slightly but nodded. "Fine, but make it quick. I have a meeting in half an hour." Linda moved swiftly, setting her clipboard on the desk and kneeling by the computer tower. She retrieved a small USB device from her pocket, a piece of advanced FBI technology capable of copying data undetected, while also installing a security protocol to protect the system from future breaches. As the device worked silently, Linda engaged Reed in light conversation to distract him. "Busy day, I assume?" she asked, her tone casual. Reed chuckled dryly. "Busy is an understatement. It seems like every day there's another fire to put out." "This department doesn't exactly run itself." Linda nodded, keeping her hands steady as she adjusted the cables to maintain her cover. "Sounds like you've got your hands full." Reed sighed. "Comes with the territory. But the wrong people gain the upper hand if we don't do our jobs." His words resonated with Linda more deeply than she expected. Reed didn't realize how close he was to becoming a casualty in a larger game, and Linda silently vowed to ensure he stayed safe. The USB device's small light blinked twice, signaling that the data transfer was complete. Linda straightened and unplugged the device, slipping it back into her pocket like a standard tool. "All set," she said, offering Reed a polite nod. "You shouldn't have any more issues." "Good," Reed replied, already turning back to his work. "Thanks for the quick fix." As Linda exited the office, her calm demeanor betrayed none of the tension she felt. She walked briskly but not hurriedly, her steps deliberate as she navigated back through the building's corridors. It wasn't until she exited the building and stepped into the bustling city street that she allowed herself to exhale. The hardest part was over, but she knew the mission was far from complete. Later that evening, Linda returned to Ethan Grant's luxurious penthouse, the USB drive tucked securely in her bag. The setting was as extravagant as ever. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and leather. Ethan greeted her with his usual calm demeanor, though his sharp eyes seemed to scrutinize her every move. "You're earlier than I expected," he remarked, a faint hint of amusement in his tone. Linda handed him the USB drive without hesitation. "The job's done," she said simply. Ethan took the device, holding it to the light as if assessing its authenticity. "Efficient," he said, though his voice had an edge. "I like that." Linda remained composed, her expression unreadable. She knew Ethan couldn't easily trust, and she couldn't afford any slip-ups. As Ethan plugged the USB drive into his laptop, Linda watched discreetly, her heart pounding. The files would give Ethan what he wanted, enough to believe she had fulfilled his task, while the FBI's installed safeguards would ensure the data couldn't be exploited further. Ethan's eyes flicked across the screen as he reviewed the files, his expression inscrutable. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, a faint smile on his lips. "Impressive," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd be able to pull it off, but you've exceeded my expectations." "I aim to deliver," Linda replied, her tone steady. Ethan studied her momentarily, as though trying to decipher the thoughts behind her calm exterior. "You know," he said, his voice lower now, "most people hesitate when faced with a task like this. But not you. That tells me you're not afraid to do what's necessary." Linda held his gaze, refusing to flinch under his scrutiny. "I told you, I'm tired of waiting for justice. Sometimes you have to take matters into your own hands." Ethan nodded slowly, a hint of approval in his expression. "I respect that, and I think you're starting to understand how things work in my world." As Linda left the penthouse, her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. She had completed the mission without compromising her principles, but Ethan's words lingered in her mind. The deeper she infiltrated his world, the more dangerous the game became. She had secured Ethan's trust for now, but she knew it wouldn't last forever. The stakes were rising, and the line between her mission and her morals grew increasingly thin. For a few days, Linda Matthews managed to maintain a semblance of calm. She had delivered the files to Ethan Grant, safeguarded the government official from harm, and earned herself a cautious place in Ethan's orbit. However, her reprieve was short-lived. One evening, Linda received an unexpected call. Ethan's smooth, measured voice came through the line. "Linda, I need you to come by. We have something urgent to discuss." The tone of his request left no room for refusal. Moments later, Linda found herself in Ethan's penthouse, the city lights casting a kaleidoscope of colors through the massive windows. Bookmark. Ethan sat at the head of a long, dark wooden table, his posture relaxed but commanding. Around the table were several of his trusted associates, their faces a mix of intrigue and caution. Linda immediately sensed the gravity of the meeting. "We have a problem," Ethan began, his voice calm but with an edge of steel. "There's been a leak in our operations, someone's been feeding information to outsiders." The air in the room thickened, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone. Linda maintained her composure, though her mind raced. Was this a calculated ploy to flush her out? Ethan's piercing gaze swept across the table, lingering on each person as if gauging their reactions. "Loyalty is the foundation of everything we've built. Without it, we fall apart. If there's a traitor among us, they will be dealt with." The statement hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threats. Ethan's gaze finally landed on Linda, holding for a moment longer than necessary. "Linda," he said, his tone deceptively light, "you're new here, but you've proven yourself capable. Tell me, what should we do about this situation?" It was a test, plain and simple. Ethan was watching for any hesitation, any sign that she might be hiding something. Linda took a moment, her expression thoughtful but confident. "Trust is earned," she said, meeting his gaze. "But once it's broken, it's hard to rebuild. If someone is betraying this organization, you're right to address it decisively. I'd also suggest looking at who might have the most to gain from a leak like this." Ethan tilted his head slightly, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "An interesting perspective," he said, "but actions speak louder than words." He reached into a folder and pulled out a dossier, sliding it across the table to Linda. "There's someone I need you to deal with," he said. Linda opened the folder, her stomach tightening as she scanned the details. The target was Jason Ward, a small business owner who had refused to cooperate with Ethan's network. Jason was no threat, just a man standing his ground against a dangerous system. "This man has been interfering with my operations," Ethan said, his tone icy. "He needs to understand his place." Linda's pulse quickened, but she kept her face neutral. "What exactly do you want me to do?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes never leaving hers. "Send a message, make him reconsider his choices." The room was silent, every eye now fixed on Linda. She knew this was more than just an assignment. It was another test designed to gauge her loyalty and willingness to compromise her principles. "I'll handle it," Linda said, her tone steady. Ethan's lips curled into a faint smile. "Good. I knew I could count on you." As Linda left the meeting, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She couldn't bring herself to harm Jason Ward, but failing to carry out the mission would destroy Ethan's trust in her. She needed a plan that would satisfy Ethan while protecting Jason. Back at her apartment, Linda contacted Michael Hunter, her FBI handler. "We have a problem," she said bluntly, explaining the situation. Michael listened carefully before responding. "You need to find a way to make it look convincing without putting Jason in danger. This is a delicate balance, Linda. If you slip, Ethan will see right through it." Linda spent the night devising a strategy. By morning, she had a plan that was risky but necessary. The next day, Linda visited Jason Ward's shop under the guise of a regular customer. She waited until the place was empty before approaching him discreetly. "Jason," she said softly, showing him her FBI badge, "I'm here to help you, but I need your cooperation. This situation is bigger than you realize." Jason's eyes widened, fear and confusion flickering across his face. "What's going on? Why is someone like you in my shop?" Linda explained the circumstances quickly but clearly. "Ethan Grant thinks you're a threat to his operations. He's asked me to send a message, but I'm not here to hurt you. We will stage an incident to make it look like you've backed down." Jason hesitated, skepticism etched into his features. "How do I know I can trust you?" Linda held his gaze, her voice firm. "Because if I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't be having this conversation. But if we don't act, Ethan will send someone else who won't give you a choice." After a tense moment, Jason nodded reluctantly. "All right, what do you need me to do?" Linda and Jason staged a confrontation that appeared intense but was carefully orchestrated to avoid any actual harm. An FBI colleague posing as a local investigator arrived on the scene, adding authenticity to the charade. Photos and video footage depicted Jason as shaken and willing to comply with Ethan's demands. Linda met with Ethan again 2 days later, handing him the fabricated evidence. "The mission is complete," she said confidently. Ethan reviewed the materials, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. "Impressive work," he said. "You're proving to be quite the asset, Linda." Linda maintained her composure, knowing full well Ethan wasn't entirely convinced. He would continue to test her and push her into more difficult situations. For now, she had preserved her cover and protected an innocent man. But the line she was walking was growing thinner, and each step brought her closer to the edge. Days after her carefully staged operation, Linda Matthews felt the tension around her grow heavier. Ethan Grant's world operated on paranoia and precision, and the closer she got to its core, the more dangerous her position became. Ethan's associates were a mix of cunning opportunists and hardened enforcers, each more suspicious than the last. Linda had earned Ethan's trust to a degree, but she knew it was conditional. His sharp and calculating gaze followed her at every meeting, as though searching for cracks in her facade. Her latest challenge came as an invitation, or rather, a summons, to a high-stakes meeting at one of Ethan's private estates. The secluded property, surrounded by dense woods, exuded an air of exclusivity and secrecy. When Linda arrived, she was led into a minimalist yet luxurious conference room. Around the table sat Ethan's most trusted allies, each radiating a mix of confidence and caution. The atmosphere was tense, the stakes palpable. Ethan entered last, his commanding presence silencing any murmured conversations. He took his seat at the head of the table, his piercing gaze sweeping over everyone before settling on Linda for a moment longer than necessary. "We have a lot to discuss," Ethan began, his voice calm but with an unmistakable edge. "Loyalty is everything in this business, and recently I've had reasons to question it." Linda's pulse quickened, but her expression remained neutral. She knew Ethan wasn't one to make empty accusations. If he suspected a betrayal, he likely had leads or was setting a trap. Ethan gestured to one of his associates, who produced a folder and handed it to him. "I've been getting reports of unusual activity," Ethan continued, flipping through the documents. "Leaked information, disrupted plans, it all points to someone on the inside." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Ethan's gaze moved deliberately from one person to the next, his expression unreadable. "I don't need to remind anyone what happens to traitors," he said, his tone colder now. "If someone in this room is working against me, speak now, or face the consequences." Linda forced herself to remain calm, her hands resting lightly on the table. She could feel the eyes of the others on her, some curious, others suspicious. This was Ethan's way of testing her yet again, probing for any reaction that might betray her true motives. When Ethan's gaze landed on her, she met it head-on, her voice steady. "Trust is the foundation of everything we do," she said. "If someone has broken that trust, they're not just a threat to you, they're a threat to all of us." Ethan tilted his head slightly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "An interesting perspective," he said, "and one I happen to agree with." He leaned forward, his sharp eyes locked onto hers. "That's why I've decided to test everyone's loyalty here, starting with you." Linda's heart skipped a beat, but her face betrayed nothing. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her tone even. Ethan handed her a small USB drive and an address. "There's sensitive information that needs to be delivered to one of our partners," he said. "It's a simple task, but one I want to be handled personally." The task sounded straightforward, but Linda knew better. Ethan's trust was a fragile, shifting thing, and this was no ordinary errand. He was testing her again, watching for any sign of hesitation or misstep. "I'll take care of it," Linda said, slipping the drive into her pocket. Ethan nodded, a faint glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. "Good. Don't disappoint me." As Linda left the meeting, her mind raced. The address Ethan had given her was unfamiliar, but she suspected it was one of his covert operations. The drive, however, was the real concern. If it contained critical data, it could be the key to dismantling his network, but it could also be a trap designed to expose her. Back at her apartment, Linda immediately contacted Michael Hunter. "Ethan's given me a new task," she said, relaying the details. Michael's tone was tense. "Do you think it's a setup?" "Could be," Linda replied. "But whatever's on this drive is important enough for Ethan to insist I deliver it personally. We need to find out what's inside." Michael hesitated. Intercepting it could tip him off. "I'll handle it," Linda said firmly, "but I need a backup plan in case this goes sideways." After a brief discussion, they agreed on a strategy. The FBI would monitor her from a distance, ready to intervene if the situation became dangerous. The following evening, Linda arrived at the address Ethan had given her, a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The building was surrounded by high fences and patrolled by guards, their weapons glinting under the dim light of street lamps. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. A man in a tailored suit greeted her, his demeanor cold and professional. "You have the package?" he asked. Linda nodded, handing over the drive. The man inspected it briefly, before gesturing for her to wait. As he disappeared into another room, Linda's sharp eyes scanned her surroundings. The warehouse was filled with crates and equipment, all unmarked but clearly valuable. The operation was larger than she had anticipated, and every detail she observed was another piece of the puzzle. Moments later, the man returned, his expression neutral. "The package is secure," he said. "You're free to go." Linda nodded, her face calm, but her mind was racing. She exited the warehouse and slipped into the shadows, her thoughts already on her next move. Back in her car, she contacted Michael. "The delivery's done," she said. "But the setup inside that warehouse is bigger than we thought. We need to move fast before Ethan relocates." Michael's voice was grim. "Understood. We'll start planning the raid immediately. Stay close to Ethan and keep gathering intel." "We're getting close, Linda." Linda exhaled slowly, the weight of the mission pressing down on her. Each step brought her closer to dismantling Ethan's empire, but it also brought her closer to the edge of exposure. For now, she had passed Ethan's latest test, but she knew the game was far from over. Linda Matthews had barely finished reviewing the details of her latest mission when her secure phone buzzed with an urgent call. It was Michael Hunter, his voice clipped and tense. "Linda, we're moving in on Ethan's operation tonight," he said. "The warehouse you visited, it's a hub for his international dealings. We can't risk him relocating the assets. The raid's happening in an hour." Linda froze for a moment, the weight of the decision settling in. "An hour?" she echoed. "Michael, Ethan's not stupid. If he realizes we're coming, he'll destroy everything, including me." Michael's voice softened, though the urgency remained. "I know it's risky, but we don't have a choice. Stay close to him, but be ready to act if things go south. This could be the break we need to bring him down." Linda agreed reluctantly, her mind racing as she prepared for what was to come. She wasn't just walking into a raid, she was walking into a storm that could unravel everything she had worked for. Later that evening, Linda found herself back at Ethan's main hideout, a sprawling mansion tucked deep in the woods. The estate was a fortress, complete with armed guards patrolling the grounds and surveillance cameras at every corner. The air buzzed with tension, a feeling that something monumental was about to happen. Ethan greeted her in his usual composed manner, though his eyes held a sharper edge than usual. "You're just in time," he said, motioning for her to follow him. He led her to the command room, a space filled with screens displaying live feeds of the estate and its surroundings. Ethan's top lieutenants were gathered, their expressions tense as they discussed logistics for an upcoming shipment. Linda's instincts screamed at her to stay calm and avoid drawing attention to herself. She took her place near Ethan, blending into the background as much as possible. Suddenly, the tranquility of the night was shattered by the distant sound of sirens. Bright red and blue lights pierced the darkness as a convoy of FBI vehicles tore down the winding road leading to the estate. Ethan's head snapped toward the surveillance monitors, his face darkening with fury. "Betrayal," he muttered under his breath. The room erupted into chaos as Ethan began barking orders. "Lock down the perimeter. No one leaves without my permission." Guards scrambled to defensive positions, their weapons ready as the sirens grew louder. Linda, maintaining her cover, moved with the rushing crowd, her expression composed despite the storm brewing inside her. "Linda," Ethan's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. She turned to see him striding toward her, his eyes blazing with suspicion. "Come with me," he ordered. Linda followed him into a smaller, dimly lit room. Ethan shut the door behind them, the click of the lock echoing ominously. He turned to face her, his gaze cold and piercing. "Care to explain how the FBI knows about this location?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Linda felt her breath catch, but she quickly regained her composure. "I don't know," she replied evenly. "Maybe they've been tracking one of your associates." Ethan chuckled darkly, though his eyes held no humor. "Really? Then why does this feel like more than just bad luck?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "If you've betrayed me, Linda, you'll regret it." Before she could respond, the sound of gunfire erupted outside, followed by the shouts of FBI agents breaching the estate. The chaos outside escalated rapidly, creating a cacophony of violence and orders shouted through the thick night air. Ethan stormed out of the room, leaving Linda alone. She took a moment to steady her breathing, knowing the next few minutes would determine everything. The gunfire intensified as FBI agents clashed with Ethan's guards. Smoke filled the air, and the sound of shattering glass echoed through the mansion. Linda ducked low, weaving through the hallways as she assessed her options. Her hand instinctively tightened around the concealed USB drive in her pocket. It was a crucial piece of evidence, and she had to ensure its safety. As she moved toward the command room, Linda encountered one of Ethan's guards, a towering man with a cold, menacing demeanor. He blocked her path, his weapon drawn. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded, his voice low and threatening. Linda didn't respond. Instead, she acted. With swift precision, she disarmed the guard, knocking his weapon to the floor before delivering a sharp strike that rendered him unconscious. She couldn't afford to hesitate, not now. Reaching the command room, Linda peered through the crack in the door and spotted Ethan. He stood in the center of the chaos, issuing orders with a chilling calm. His focus was on escaping, and his most loyal guards were preparing a black SUV for his getaway. Linda's heart sank as she realized she couldn't stop him. Not here. Not now. Ethan was too well protected, and the chaos was too overwhelming. She slipped back into the shadows, her focus now on finding her own way out. The mansion shook as an explosion tore through one of its wings, sending debris raining down. Linda ducked behind a stone pillar, narrowly avoiding the falling rubble. Finally, she made it to the front of the estate, where FBI agents were securing the perimeter. Spotting Michael Hunter among them, she hurried over and handed him the USB drive. "It's all here," she said breathlessly. "Everything we need to dismantle his operation." Michael took the drive, his expression grim. "And Ethan? He escaped," Linda admitted, her voice heavy with frustration. "But this isn't over. We'll get him." Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've done more than we could have hoped, Linda. This is a massive step forward." As the FBI began clearing the estate, Linda stood quietly, her eyes fixed on the dark forest where Ethan had vanished. She knew he wouldn't give up easily, and neither would she. The raid on Ethan Grant's mansion had dealt a significant blow to his operation, but it wasn't the decisive victory Linda Matthews had hoped for. Ethan had slipped through the FBI's fingers, vanishing into the night like a ghost. Back at the FBI headquarters, the atmosphere was tense, yet tinged with a sense of accomplishment. Agents reviewed the data recovered from the USB drive Linda had retrieved, uncovering a web of criminal connections that spanned continents. Names, locations, and financial transactions painted a damning picture of Ethan's empire. Michael Hunter stood beside Linda as the analysts worked tirelessly, their screens flashing with decrypted files. "This is enough to dismantle a large part of his operation," Michael said, his tone both relieved and wary. "But it's not over. Ethan's still out there, and he'll do everything in his power to rebuild." Linda nodded, her expression unreadable. The victory felt hollow. While the raid had crippled Ethan's network, it hadn't destroyed it. Worse, his escape meant he was already plotting his next move. Over the following weeks, Linda maintained her cover, feeding carefully curated information to the FBI while keeping tabs on Ethan's associates. The pressure was immense, every interaction a delicate balancing act. Ethan, for his part, had gone to ground. His absence was both a relief and a danger. Without him, his network was vulnerable, but his reemergence could spell disaster if he struck back before the FBI could act. Then, one night, Linda received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Linda," Ethan's familiar voice came through the line, calm yet laced with tension. "We need to talk." Her heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "Ethan, where have you been?" "Watching," he replied cryptically. "Planning. There's been a lot of noise lately, and I don't trust anyone, including me," Linda thought, but didn't say. Instead, she pressed cautiously. "What do you need?" Ethan's tone hardened. "I want to meet. Tomorrow night? I'll send you the location." The line went dead before she could respond. Linda stared at her phone, the weight of the moment sinking in. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a test. The next evening, Linda arrived at the designated location, a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with tension as she stepped inside, her senses on high alert. Ethan was waiting for her, his silhouette stark against the dim glow of industrial lights. He was flanked by 2 guards, their imposing figures a silent reminder of the danger she was in. "You came," Ethan said, his voice measured as he gestured for her to approach. Linda took a step forward, maintaining a calm exterior despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Of course, you said it was important." Ethan studied her for a moment, his sharp eyes searching for any sign of betrayal. "Do you know why I called you here?" Linda shook her head, keeping her response neutral. "No, but I assume you'll tell me." Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I need to know I can trust you, Linda. After everything that's happened, trust is hard to come by." "I understand," Linda said, her tone steady, "but I've proven myself to you. Have you?" Ethan's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You've been loyal, yes, but loyalty isn't enough. I need certainty." Linda's pulse quickened, but she held her ground. "What do you want me to do?" Ethan gestured to a nearby table, where a laptop and several documents were spread out. "I want you to take the lead on our next operation," he said. "It's high risk, high reward. If you succeed, there won't be any doubt about where your loyalties lie." Linda approached the table, her eyes scanning the details. The operation involved smuggling high-value assets across international borders, a dangerous and complex task that required meticulous planning. "I'll do it," Linda said, her voice firm. Ethan nodded, a faint glimmer of approval in his eyes. "Good. But remember, failure isn't an option." As Linda left the warehouse, her mind raced with possibilities. The operation was a trap in more ways than one. Not only was it a test of her loyalty, but it also posed a direct challenge to her principles. Back at her apartment, Linda contacted Michael, relaying the details of the operation. "This is bigger than anything we've dealt with so far," she said. "If we play this right, we can bring down the rest of his network." Michael's voice was grim. "It's risky, Linda, but if you're sure you can handle it, we'll back you every step of the way." "I can handle it," Linda said, her resolve unshaken. Over the next few days, Linda meticulously planned her approach, balancing Ethan's expectations with the FBI's objectives. The stakes had never been higher, but she was determined to see the mission through. The time for hesitation was over. Ethan's empire had to fall, no matter the cost. The warehouse buzzed with activity as Linda Matthews stepped into the heart of Ethan Grant's latest operation. Crates lined the walls, their contents concealed but undoubtedly valuable. Men and women moved with purpose, checking manifests and loading trucks under the dim glow of hanging industrial lights. The air was thick with tension, a mixture of anticipation and paranoia. Bookmark. Linda had spent the past few days navigating a web of instructions and counter-instructions, balancing her role as Ethan's trusted confidant and her duty as an FBI agent. The operation Ethan had tasked her with leading wasn't just another smuggling job. It was a pivotal move that would determine the future of his empire. As Linda walked through the warehouse, Ethan appeared from the shadows, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. He approached her with his usual composed demeanor, though his gaze carried a hint of suspicion. "Everything in place?" he asked, his tone calm but edged with steel. Linda nodded. "The routes are secure, and the shipments will move as planned." Ethan studied her for a moment, his silence heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, he nodded. "Good. I'm trusting you with this, Linda. Don't let me down." The weight of his words settled on her shoulders as Ethan walked away. She knew this wasn't just about the operation, It was another test of her loyalty. Any misstep, no matter how small, could shatter the fragile trust she had built. Linda moved to a quiet corner of the warehouse, pulling out a secure phone to contact Michael Hunter. "It's happening tonight," she said in a low voice. "The shipments are moving in 2 hours. We need to be ready." Michael's voice was steady but tense. "We've got teams in position. Are you sure you can maintain your cover when this goes down?" "I don't have a choice," Linda replied. "If I break now, everything we've worked for will fall apart." Michael hesitated. "Just be careful. If Ethan even suspects you're working against him." "He won't," Linda interrupted, her tone firm. "I'll make sure of it." As the clock ticked closer to the operation's start, Linda felt the pressure mounting. She had spent months infiltrating Ethan's world, but tonight was different. Tonight, everything was on the line. When the trucks were finally loaded, Ethan gathered his top lieutenants in the warehouse's central office. The atmosphere was tense, the air charged with expectation. Ethan addressed the group with his usual calm authority. "This is the biggest operation we've undertaken in months," he said. "If everything goes smoothly, we'll be stronger than ever. If not," his eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Linda. "There will be consequences." Linda met his gaze without flinching, her expression composed. She knew better than to show any sign of doubt. As the trucks began to roll out, Linda joined Ethan near the main gate. He watched the convoy with a mix of pride and caution, his hands clasped behind his back. "It's a good feeling," Ethan said, almost to himself, "knowing that every piece is in place, every move calculated." Linda nodded, her stomach churning with tension. She knew the FBI was waiting, poised to intercept the shipments. What she didn't know was how Ethan would react when everything fell apart. As the first truck exited the gate, a sudden explosion of lights and sirens shattered the night. FBI vehicles swarmed the area, blocking the exits as agents poured into the warehouse, weapons drawn. FBI, hands in the air. Chaos erupted. Guards scrambled to defend the operation, their shouts mixing with the crack of gunfire. Ethan's calm facade cracked for a brief moment before he barked orders to his men. "Secure the shipments. Don't let them take anything." Linda moved quickly, her heart pounding. She stayed close to Ethan, and every action was carefully calculated to maintain her cover. But as the raid intensified, she realized there was no way to keep up the charade forever. Ethan turned to her, his eyes blazing. "You said everything was secure. How did they know?" Linda opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, one of Ethan's lieutenants approached, panic etched across his face. "They're everywhere, boss. We're surrounded." Ethan's jaw tightened as he scanned the chaos. His sharp mind was already calculating an escape. "We're leaving," he said, grabbing Linda's arm. He led her toward a back exit, where a black SUV was waiting. As they climbed inside, Linda's mind raced. She needed to signal the FBI without alerting Ethan, but there was no time. The SUV sped through the narrow streets, weaving between buildings as the sound of sirens faded into the distance. Ethan sat in silence, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "This wasn't just bad luck," he said, his voice low and cold. "Someone tipped them off." Linda felt his eyes on her, sharp and probing. She kept her expression neutral, her voice steady. "What are you saying?" Ethan didn't reply immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his seat, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'm saying there's a traitor among us, and I intend to find out who." The tension in the car was suffocating as they drove deeper into the city. Linda knew Ethan's suspicion was growing, and she was running out of time. When the SUV finally stopped in a quiet alley, Ethan stepped out, motioning for Linda to follow. His guards formed a perimeter, their weapons ready. Ethan turned to Linda, his expression hard. "You've been loyal so far," he said. "But I need to know, can I still trust you?" Linda met his gaze, her voice calm despite the storm raging inside her. "You can." Ethan studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Good. Because if I find out otherwise..." He let the sentence hang, the unspoken threat clear. As the SUV pulled away, Linda's mind raced. The game was nearing its end, but she wasn't sure how many moves she had left. Ethan Grant's escape had shifted the game into its most dangerous phase. Every encounter now carried the weight of unspoken accusations, and Linda Matthews felt the walls closing in. Ethan's paranoia had reached its peak, his trust eroding even for his closest allies. Linda knew the FBI had one last chance to bring him down, and time wasn't on their side. She spent the following days carefully gathering information, using every ounce of her training to stay one step ahead of Ethan's suspicions. But his sharp eyes were always watching, and she could feel his questions growing sharper. Finally, the break came. The FBI intercepted a communication detailing Ethan's plan to flee the country through a hidden tunnel at the border. The operation would be complex, but it offered the best chance to capture him before he disappeared for good. Linda contacted Michael Hunter, her handler, as soon as she confirmed the details. "He's moving tonight," she said, her voice urgent. "We need to act fast." Michael's response was immediate. "We're mobilizing now. Stay close to him, but don't take any unnecessary risks. If he suspects you, he won't hesitate to act." Linda agreed, though the tension in her chest made it hard to breathe. She had spent months infiltrating Ethan's network, risking everything to bring him down. Now, the moment of reckoning was finally here. That evening, Linda joined Ethan at a remote safe house near the border. The air was thick with tension as he paced the room, issuing final instructions to his men. The plan was meticulous. Every detail was accounted for. Ethan was nothing if not thorough. As the hour approached, Ethan turned to Linda, his sharp eyes scanning her face. "You've been quiet," he said, his tone probing. "Nervous?" Linda shook her head, her voice steady. "Just focused. We can't afford any mistakes." Ethan studied her for a moment longer before nodding. "Good. Because tonight, everything changes." The convoy left the safe house under the cover of darkness, the vehicles moving in tight formation. Linda rode in the second car, her heart pounding as the weight of the mission pressed down on her. When they reached the border, Ethan's men began unloading crates and preparing the tunnel. The air was thick with urgency, every move precise and deliberate. Linda's hand brushed against the concealed transmitter in her pocket. She knew the FBI was positioned nearby, waiting for her signal. It was time. She pressed the button. Moments later, the night exploded with the sound of sirens and the blinding flash of emergency lights. FBI vehicles swarmed the area, blocking escape routes as agents stormed the scene. "FBI, drop your weapons." The chaos was immediate. Ethan's men scrambled to defend the operation, their shouts mixing with the crack of gunfire. Smoke filled the air as crates were overturned, spilling their contents across the ground. Ethan's sharp voice cut through the noise. "Fall back. Protect the tunnel." Linda moved carefully through the chaos, staying close to Ethan while avoiding direct involvement in the fight. She needed to ensure he didn't escape while keeping her own cover intact. Ethan turned to her, his expression dark. "This was supposed to be secure. How did they know?" Linda met his gaze, her voice calm despite the storm raging around them. "I don't know, but we need to move. Now." Ethan nodded, his mind already calculating the next move. He signaled to his men, and they began retreating toward the tunnel. Linda followed, her pulse racing. She knew the FBI was closing in and Ethan's capture was within reach. But as they entered the tunnel, the situation took a dangerous turn. Ethan stopped abruptly, his eyes narrowing as he turned to face her. "You've been with me through all of this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But I can't ignore the fact that every time something goes wrong, you're there." Linda's breath caught, but she kept her expression neutral. "Are you questioning me now, Ethan?" she asked, her tone steady. Ethan stepped closer, his sharp eyes boring into hers. "I'm questioning everything. Loyalty is earned, Linda, and trust is fragile. So tell me, why should I trust you now?" The tension was suffocating, the air thick with unspoken threats. Linda knew the next words out of her mouth could determine everything. "You should trust me," she said evenly, "because I've risked everything to be here. You know that as well as I do." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, the chaos outside seeming to fade into the background. Finally, he nodded. "Then prove it. Get us out of here." Linda's mind raced as she led Ethan deeper into the tunnel, her every move calculated. The FBI was closing in, and she needed to find a way to separate herself from Ethan without blowing her cover. When they reached a narrow passageway, Linda saw her chance. "This way," she said, motioning for Ethan to follow. As he stepped forward, Linda moved quickly, slipping back into the shadows. Moments later, FBI agents stormed the tunnel, their weapons trained on Ethan and his men. "Ethan Grant, you're under arrest." Ethan's face twisted in fury as he realized what was happening. He turned to search for Linda, but she was already gone, blending into the chaos as the agents secured the scene. Outside, Linda watched from a distance as Ethan was led away in handcuffs. His sharp eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, a mixture of anger and betrayal flashing across his face. "You think this is over?" Ethan called out, his voice cold and defiant. "You've won nothing. My empire will rise again." Linda didn't respond. Her expression was calm but resolute. She knew the fight wasn't over, not yet. In the days that followed, Ethan's capture dominated the headlines. His network began to crumble under the weight of the evidence Linda had helped gather, and his empire was dealt a devastating blow. But for Linda, the victory felt incomplete. She knew Ethan's words carried a bitter truth. His empire wasn't just about him. It was rooted in systems of corruption and exploitation that would take years to dismantle. Sitting alone in her apartment, Linda stared out at the city lights, her mind heavy with the weight of her mission. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but she was determined to keep fighting. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to herself. Justice wasn't just about taking down one man. It was about building a better future. The story of Linda Matthews is a gripping reminder of the complexities of justice and the sacrifices required to achieve it. Through her courage and determination, she managed to infiltrate a dangerous criminal network, dismantle parts of its foundation, and bring Ethan Grant to justice. Yet, the story does not end with his capture. It serves as a powerful reflection on how deeply corruption and systemic injustice are entrenched and how true change requires persistence, resilience, and a relentless pursuit of equity. Linda's journey highlights the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity and using intelligence, courage, and strategy to fight for what is right. It's a testament to the fact that justice is not simply about bringing down one villain, but addressing the root causes that allow such villains to thrive. Her story inspires us to think beyond immediate victories and consider the broader impact of our actions. This tale also sheds light on the courage it takes to navigate morally gray areas and maintain integrity when faced with difficult choices. Linda's ability to protect innocent lives while staying focused on her mission is a lesson in empathy and strategic thinking. It reminds us that the path to justice is rarely straightforward, but is always worth pursuing. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Was it inspiring? Did it leave you reflecting on what justice truly means? If you thought the story was good, comment with a 1. If you found it amazing, comment with a 2. We also invite you to share your own stories. What moments in your life have taught you about courage and resilience? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more meaningful and impactful stories coming soon. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We're excited to hear from you.